Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we're doing an old-timey reaction video. We're reacting to a news article from the New York Times, and oh man, haven't they just been putting out some pieces of journalism recently. Oh boy. And this one, I feel like it flew under the radar, but considering the intersection of a lot of other things that have been popping up in the news as of late, which we'll probably discuss as we get into this, I felt it was important to really sit and break this one down because it is so representative of so many things coming out recently and almost a movement that's kind of starting in a way that I have concerns about. So background for this is there was an article that is an opinion piece. It's actually an opinion guest essay for the New York Times that came out the day before Valentine's Day. So cool. Love the sheer coincidence of this. I'm quite certain. And this piece was written by Magdalene, I think is how you say it, Magdalene Taylor, who as far as I can tell has kind of like a cute journalism blog type thing. Like she does a lot of articles that are kind of like sassy, like late era BuzzFeed, maybe sort of Vice type stuff if I had to put a pin on it. I don't know if she has any like super problematic opinions. I couldn't really get a gist of that from her Twitter feed or from her other articles that she's written, so I don't really know a lot about her or her other opinions, but if you do, let me know in a comment down below if you've seen this individual before. But this article, as I already said, it had a lot in it, so let's go ahead and just get into it. In order to not take anything out of context, we're just gonna read this entire thing together. It's not super long, and we're gonna break it down as we get into the arguments that this opinion piece is making. Sex is good. Sex is healthy. Sex is an essential part of our social fabric, and you, specifically, should probably be having more of it. That is a very strong opening line, for sure, especially like the me specifically, I, the reader, should probably be having more sex. Okay, all right. And I will say, I didn't say this before, I came across this article because I was like notified on Twitter of like it being on my feed, not because I follow her, but because like people I follow her, and then like somebody I knew liked it, and then that's how I saw it, and I was like, oh, what is this? I did not go into this article knowing anything about it, knowing that it was going to be like a bad time. I think I was one of the first people on like Ace Twitter to talk about this, and I'm not gonna take credit for that. Like, it could be somebody else besides me, but like, I did not know what I was walking into, and this first line right here is quite interesting, especially it's an essential part of our social fabric is very fascinating. As an ace person that has community with other ace people, like we are certainly able to have a social fabric that doesn't involve sex because we're all ace people. And it would be equally strange if you took this and then said that like romance was an essential part of our social fabric. Like aromantics, I think y'all would probably agree with me. You can have a social connection without romance and certainly have a society that is not based on that entirely. So, strong opinion here. Let's see where this goes. Americans, in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, are not having enough sex. Across almost every demographic group, American adults, old and young, single and coupled, rich and poor, are having less sex than they have had at any point in at least the past 3 decades. Sex isn't the sole form of fulfilling human interaction and certainly isn't a salve for loneliness in all forms. Still, it should be seen as a critical part of our social well-being, not an indulgence or an afterthought. This is in large part because the rise in loneliness closely parallels a decline in sex. More than a quarter of Americans hadn't had sex even once in the past year, the last time the General Society survey asked, in 2021. It was the highest such level of sexlessness in the survey's history. That figure includes almost 30% of men under 30, a figure that has tripled since 2008. In the 1990s, about half of Americans were having sex weekly or more. that figure is now under 40%. For many who are having sex, the frequency has dropped precipitously. And it's not just sex. Partnership and cohabitation are down too. Less time spent with friends and lovers. These aren't distinct issues, but symptoms of the same cultural malaise, an isolation that is demolishing American social lives, love lives, and happiness. Estimates vary, but somewhere between a third and two-thirds of Americans report being lonely. Loneliness exists on a feedback loop. Fraying cultural bonds, damaged physical health, and reduced social contact both exacerbate loneliness and are exacerbated by it, to the point that loneliness lowers life expectancy. Loneliness is a challenging phenomena for researchers to quantify, but there are telltale signs, and they point to society losing its way. The number of Americans who report having no close friends at all has quadrupled since 1990, according to a Survey Center on American Life study. An average American in 2021 spent 58% less time with friends than in 2013, the Census Bureau found. COVID-19 has contributed to the spike in loneliness and the decline in sex, but is only partially responsible. Between 2014 and 2019, the decrease in time people spent with friends was greater than it was during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, many Americans spent more and more time alone, with neither friends nor romantic partners. Younger Americans are, infamously, less likely to have sex than their parent generations. And when they do have sex, they're doing it with fewer partners. And I will just say right now, as we're getting into more of the opinion piece of this, and we're talking about, okay, here's the stats, like, yes, people are lonelier. People do have less connection. We have looked at these studies before. I've talked about them in other videos. I am aware that this is a problem. However, I think as we get into this, we will see that maybe the solutions offered for this problem are not as comprehensive or as connected to the reasons for loneliness that maybe the author would like to believe. But I do think that loneliness is a problem for men, for women, for everyone. I think a lack of friendships is a problem. And I think that when we're looking at loneliness, and I don't want to, give up the ghost here too quickly on what this article kind of gets to, but loneliness isn't just solved by intimate physical interactions with people you're involved with sexually or romantic dating. I think a lot of the issues we're having is because people don't value friendships. They're not taught to value it. Movies, media do not enforce friendship as being important. Friendship is seen as the side thing you pay attention to when you're not actively dating, or when you are married, you have married friends, and when you have kids, you have friendships with people who also have kids, and your world is revolved around your romantic partner and other people fitting into that on the side if and when they can. And there are so many stories of people that had lifelong friendships that kind of just disappear the second somebody gets in a super serious relationship, or when they get married, they go off and do their own thing. And to some extent, that's fine. You're allowed to do that, obviously, but on a grander scale, the abandonment of friendship as an important access of interaction is obviously going to lead to loneliness, because if you don't have friends, you're going to be less likely to meet people that you could be romantic with, because outside of dating apps, one of the key ways that people meet people for dating is through mutual friends. So, even if you're only thinking about it in terms of, what can I get out of this? How can I use this friendship to advance my needs? Friendship's also a pretty key way that people meet others. And I'll talk about how that relates to, the BDSM community as well, and community spaces and friendships again as we get more into this. In my work as a writer covering sex and culture, I've spoken to dozens of men for whom a lack of sex is the defining characteristic of their daily life. It shapes their interests, their motivations, their hopes. Some are incels, short for involuntary celibates, believers in a toxic, misogynistic ideology. Glad we can agree about that one, author. But more are not. Some believe the pursuit of sex will be entirely futile. In turn, they've begun to interpret going out, spending time with friends, and meeting new people as futile too. This thinking becomes cyclical. Soon, they're not only afraid of failing to find a sexual partner, but they also grow to fear even platonic social interactions. Sex is only one component of their overall isolation, but is, in many cases, the one upon which the overall problem hinges. It's easy to brush these men off as anomalies, or to label their state as a result of personal failings or even the consequences of modern masculinity. But while much of the research around the decline in sex focuses upon young men, almost every group of Americans is experiencing the absence of sex, and the consequences are profound. If a lack of sex is affecting the cultural and social participation of these young men, it's likely to be affecting the rest of us too. A lack of sex can easily translate into less socialization, fewer families, and a sicker population. Sex reduces pain, relieves stress, improves sleep, lowers blood pressure, and strengthens heart health. Writers like myself have made male sexlessness a well-known issue, even as women are in the same bind. Data from the General Society survey actually suggests that they may be having even less sex than men. In 2021, roughly a quarter of women under 35 reported having no sex in the past year. For men, that figure was 19%. And women who are having sex are less likely to be happy with the sex that they're having. Both men and women report feelings of regret and unhappiness following casual sex, but it's more common among women, probably in part because of the cultural perceptions of sexual autonomy. Sex can bring people together, but that only works when it's good sex. So that's interesting that a lot of men and women who have casual sex regret it and are unhappy following it, that it's not fulfilling, that it's not potentially making them feel any less lonely. That seems like a very relevant point to be making if we're going to advocate for more people to have sex, if we know that people are not being fulfilled having casual sex. Now, it's interesting in so far as the point about women and like cultural perceptions of sexual autonomy. Like, it almost kind of sounds like what the author is saying is that women would enjoy casual sex more if they didn't have the baggage of feeling like it took away their sexual autonomy. That's kind of what I'm getting from it. I don't know if y'all agree with that upon reading this line, but yeah, just put a pin in this note about casual sex not necessarily being fulfilling. And there's actually a really great creator. Her name's Maddie. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. She has a couple of really good videos talking about sex and dating and casual sex that are totally worth checking out. Maddie, call me. Let's figure out how to do something together. Love your work. But hey, go check those out because I think this is like a really good perspective on like a real life women's perception of casual sex and loneliness and dating that I think is very relevant to this conversation. But moving on into further parts of this article. Not only are women and men marching together into sexlessness, they're also on the same road to loneliness. Young women were more likely than men to report losing touch with friends during the pandemic, and a British study found that women were more likely than men to report feeling lonely often or always. Reporting often focuses on young male sexlessness and on incel ideology, but the decline in sex and rise in loneliness and social isolation are not male problems. In 21st century America, loneliness is essentially omnipresent. A high schooler's cliche fear that everyone else is having sex has never been less true. There is no one solution. The loneliness epidemic has been brought about by myriad factors that have been exacerbated over decades. Social media is one culprit. The 20th century's war of attrition against walkable communities is another. But as loneliness has accelerated, it has become self-perpetuating. Our current societal loneliness and sexlessness is a result of social and cultural shifts, while its continuation perpetuates those shifts further. And I think this is where the author's point starts to become very clear, that loneliness and sex are interrelated issues that cause each other. If you don't have sex, you become lonely, and you are lonely because you're not having sex. And if you have sex, that might be a really big fix. And though this article has and will make pains to separate itself from incel ideology and focusing on men's perception of loneliness, I think that this actually kind of buys into the incel worldview in a key way, which is, I am lonely and sad and my life sucks because I'm not having sex and I want to be having sex. That is certainly one reason that people feel lonely, but I think to tie that together, that like most people or everyone is lonely because they are not having sex, and having sex would make them feel less lonely, is obviously not true. It's not true for ace people. It's not true for people like myself even, that even if I wasn't asexual, because I am a woman, like I don't feel the same need to have social connection through sex. I think that's true for a lot of women I know. Like, sex and like socializing in friendships and not being lonely are like kind of have a little bit overlap, but like having sex by itself, everything else being equal, is not going to make me feel less lonely. But I'm in the middle of almost interrupting the key point of this article, so I'm going to shut up for now and just buckle up because we're about to go full speed ahead into the solution this article is suggesting. The loneliness epidemic may be a societal issue, but it can be solved, at least partly, at the level of individual bedrooms. Those of us in a position to be having more sex ought to be doing so. Here is the rare opportunity to do something for the betterment of the world around you that involves nothing more than indulging in one of humanity's most essential pleasures. Having more sex is both personal guidance, your doctor might well agree, and a political statement. American society is less connected, made up of individuals who seem increasingly willing to isolate themselves. Having more sex can be an act of social solidarity. Not everyone who wants to have more sex is easily capable of doing so. Disabilities, religious objections, asexuality, and any set of day-to-day restrictions and responsibilities curtail or close off sex for many. There may be some who simply do not want to have more sex, or any sex at all, but even those who won't have more sex should avoid apathy. Sex is intrinsic to a society built on social connection, and right now our connections and our sex lives are collapsing alongside each other. So I'm just gonna look at this. I don't normally like to have my phone on camera, but I feel like I gotta just really make sure I am understanding the point that is being made here correctly. And I have read this part of the article at least 5 times at this point. What this article seems to be suggesting is essentially it is your duty to have more sex to make society better. And if you don't, you are contributing to social ills. And what I find interesting is they do kind of make this like mealy-mouthed exception for like, oh, but if you're religious or you have disabilities or you're asexual, like, I mean, you don't have to have more sex, but you shouldn't be apathetic. I can't speak for everyone, but my connection to sex is not apathetic, and not having sex, not experiencing sexual attraction, which is not the same thing as chosen celibacy, or being an incel for that matter, is not about being apathetic about sex. It's about not feeling attraction to people. So, yeah, I don't feel apathy about social connections. I am in community with other asexual people. I'm part of the BDSM community. I have and value social connections. I would wager, being an ace member of the BDSM community, I have more social connections than a married monogamous couple with no friends that has sex 10 times a week. Because I go out into a community. I go to parties, I go to munches, I socialize with people I have shared interests with. I love how the much more obvious solution of like, go to a hobby group connected to your interests, socialize with your coworkers after work, is somehow completely just skipped over into like, you should be having more sex in the bedroom. Like, whoa, like if our problem is social loneliness, wouldn't making more connections with new people be the solution, not just having more individual sex with the people we're already having sex with or could have sex with? Like, how, like, I'm not, whatever inference that this author is making, I'm not seeing it. Do you guys see it? Like, how, if you're having sex with one individual person once a week, how does that go out into society when you suddenly start doing it 5 times a week or 10 times a week or 30? How, like, does it just, like, are you in a happier mood? Like, is there no limit on, like, if you just have more sex, you're happier, and then, like, that makes the world better? Is this, like, one of those, like, like Buddhist monks saying nice things to a flower instead of saying mean things that makes the flower grow more? Like, what's the connection we're making here if it's just like individual monogamous interactions? Like, what? I don't fully, like, I was with you in the first half about like loneliness being bad and people having less sex. Like, that's all true, right? But then suddenly it veers into like, and the solution is individual people having more sex for some reason, and like the social solidarity and the political statement. Let me tell you about political statements here, because this is where this one really ground my gears in particular, that like, it's an act of solidarity. It's a political statement to be having more sex. Like, yes, before feminism, before the sexual revolution happened, sex was very curtailed and regimented, and it was seen as sinful and bad to have sex outside of wedlock. You would be socially outcast. It was dangerous. You'd be burned at the stake for being a witch. Yes, all of that absolutely happened. However, and I've talked about this in other videos, when you had the sexual revolution, the people that were invested in that changed how they saw sex and the relationship to it. And it wasn't just, oh, like, let's go from sex being restricted to having any kind of sex you want and any amount that you want, like, do whatever, have whatever. No, what ended up happening largely was that there was a new expectation that as a woke, freed woman, not restrained by the boundaries of capitalism and patriarchy, you would be having lots of casual sex, that women were supposed to like having sex that way, that, you know, you're supposed to take pride in being slutty, and like you're supposed to, you know, not care about how many people you sleep with, or how, or when, or where, or why. Like, it's supposed to be a free-for-all, but it's like the expectation that you're going to do it as much as possible to prove that you are no longer under the restraints of patriarchy, and that if you're not doing that, if you are somebody who wants to wait for marriage, or you don't want to have sex at all, or you want to wait until you're in a relationship and you're in love or whatever, any of those restrictions is seen in some circles with certain individuals, and was certainly seen more this way, let's say 20 years ago, that was seen as you having internalized patriarchy in your brain controlling you and telling you as a woman that you shouldn't be having sex. And it's like, no, sometimes some of us just think differently about this, and it's not anything to do with internalized patriarchy, it's just our brains. And so pressuring people, but really women, into having more sex is not a radical political statement. It's been the same thing all the way down, and it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is, really. This happens everywhere, and it's, again, it's not radical. Like, before the revolution of sex, the pressure was on women to please their husbands, right? In the modern day, with trad wives and quiverful people and other, you know, radical conservative religious ideologies, you are also supposed to please your husband and be fruitful and multiply and have as much sex as possible and never deny your husband. Never mind the other parts of the Bible that talk about the husband's obligations towards his wife, but we're just gonna ignore that for now. And then you also have liberal people that are also very much about, like, you know, friends with benefits, casual sex, one night stands. If you're a liberated woman, you're going to love all that kind of stuff. And so the author's kind of pretending this is about people having more sex being a political statement. But I think really at the heart of it, it's about women are supposed to be having more sex, and it's our duty to be giving more sex to men to make them happier and make them less lonely. That doesn't really seem radical to me. That seems kind of status quo. Because that is something that happens in almost every person's experience, I feel like, as an ace person. Like, almost all of us go through pressure from relationships to have sex at all, to have certain types of sex, to be having more sex. Like, giving in to that is not radical. It's normal pressure. So, yeah, I'm not really buying this line so far. But anyways, I've rambled for a bit. We should get into reading more of the article. Many people, like some of the young men I've spoken to in my work, have resigned themselves to displacing their sexual desires, relying entirely on porn or other online stimuli, mirroring so many types of relationships that have been subsumed into the digital world. As a balm for loneliness, digital sex can be little better than digital friendship, a source of envy, resentfulness, and spite, a driver of loneliness rather than a cure for it. It's no match for the real thing. So any capable person should be having sex as much as they can, as pleasurably as they can, as often as they can. Online friendships, catching strays at the end there. I forgot that was in there, actually. I forgot that that was in there at the very end, because I think I just started getting angry about the political stuff, and then I blanked out the last paragraph, but, oh, wow, like, we've been active on the internet and had social spaces online for 20 years plus at this point, right? Whether it be WoW or AOL chat rooms or Facebook or now Discord, lots of people have very fulfilling, meaningful, genuine social connection through the internet, and I don't know why this author's like, well, digital friendship, what did they say? It's a source of envy, resentfulness, and spite, and a driver of loneliness. I have literally never heard this opinion before. That, and maybe is it watching other people being friends online? Because maybe I would see that in terms of like, you know, Instagram and TikTok. Watching other people having their best fun lives online can certainly cause you to feel insecure, unhappy with yourself. But having an actual friendship with somebody online does not make, like, as an implicit fact of it, does not make you envious or spiteful. Like, I'm sorry your online friendships have not gone very well, author, but I'm sure many of you have very fulfilling online relationships, met people online you ended up marrying, have healthy online DS relationships. Certainly, like, I have a pretty big Discord group. I know lots of people that during the pandemic moved to more online BDSM interactions. It's a great way for people that have disabilities, aren't mobile, can't afford a car, to be able to socialize in a way to relieve their loneliness, and you at the end are just like, don't have friends online, it makes you envious and spiteful. Like, I'm sorry, no, that's just not true. Citation needed, I'm not buying it. Like, you can make critiques about people becoming dependent on porn or things like that, but actually, from what I remember, and I'll put it on screen here if I can find it, it wasn't just that people were having less sex. They were also masturbating and watching porn less too. So this narrative that, like, oh, people are replacing real life interactions with porn and their brains are being rotted by porn isn't actually as clear cut as this author and many other people have tried to make it out to be. Sex is intrinsic to a society built on social connection. I mean, I guess the AVEN forums don't exist. I guess us ace folk on the internet with our online friends that are also asexual, we're just all lonely and bitter. They're not real friendships because we don't have sex and because we're on the internet with each other. This is one of the funny things, because ace people in particular, I think, tend to gravitate towards online social things because there's not that, like, weird pressure in the same way of, like, trying to navigate, oh, does this person, like, really want to have sex with me? Do they want to date? Like, do they have ulterior motives? Like, it's much easier to socialize when you know you're in a shared group of people that understand you, that can relate to your struggle and your goals and your happinesses and what you appreciate about life and existence. Does this person just think you can't socialize without fucking? Like, what is happening? Like, is that, like, listen, I am ace, so maybe I am missing something here, but I don't think that societies fall apart when you don't have sex. Like, do women's groups that are, like, non-lesbian, like, friendship-based women's, like, knitting circles, do they fall apart because you don't have sex? Like, are knitting groups only achievable because they're fucking their husbands at home? Like, what? Like, I don't understand this, like, connection that they're trying to make. I don't see that argument. Like, for me, the problem is not, oh, people are lonely because they're not having sex. Like, this is completely, I think, missing a lot of the important social reasons for why people are not pursuing sex. Like, yes, men are having less sex, and that is causing them, in maybe some ways, to be lonely, to withdraw. Sure, I'll buy that argument. But for women being more lonely, and then the solution you're giving to them is to have more sex, like, maybe I'm missing an element here, but for myself, for other women I know, the problem is not that we're not having sex we wish we could be having, in the sense that, like, any sex is equal regardless of where it comes from in the context. Like, as long as it feels good, right? That, like, sex is, like, this big thing that, like, everyone's supposed to enjoy. We'll talk about that. I'll finish this point first. But the women I know are not struggling with loneliness because they can't get sex. Certainly not in that simple of a way of saying it. What I have observed the problem to be is that women could be having more sex, but the conditions under which that's likely to happen is just, like, it's very fraught because of Roe v. Wade, because of the state of dating apps, the absolute state of dating apps. Oh my goodness. It is very difficult to find people that actually want to date, depending on what app you are using. The fear you have to have about somebody assaulting you, taking nude photos of you without your permission, stalking you afterwards, not taking rejection well, turning out to be a complete creepazoid. Like, there's a lot of risk that goes into having casual sex, into dating people, into having sex with them at all. The fear of being stealth, being non-consensually choked during sex, like that being on the rise. Like, there are a lot of things all coming together at the same time, where I know a lot of women that are just swearing off dating apps altogether and are going, fuck it, I'll have cats. I don't need to date. I don't need this. I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to invest in my friendships. Screw this. I've been burned one too many times. I'm too afraid. This is too dangerous. It's too hard. I can't find people who want the same things as me. Whatever. So I don't think the issue is that women would feel better if they had more sex. People, in general, need to feel safer when they are having sex, and that's not happening. And I think the massive popularity of people like Andrew Tate, of incel ideology more broadly, that is contributing to a lot of fear that is making people feel unsafe pursuing these relationships. And in my opinion, this article advocates for putting the cart before the horse in a lot of ways. Oh, society is lonely. People should be having more sex if they are in the position to do it, which is, like, vague enough to where I don't fully understand what they mean. Are you talking about people risking it and having sex on a first date more often? Are you talking about going to orgies more when you're invited? Like, what's happening? What's happening with that? I don't get with, like, oh, if you're in the position to, it doesn't mean dates. It's like, I don't fully get that. But I really do feel like it is putting the cart before the horse, as far as it's like, okay, people should be having more sex because that'll solve loneliness. But you are doing this not in a vacuum, right? Sex does not exist in a vacuum. We are dealing with a huge increase in violence towards people, and certainly certain demographics are more likely to face that violence. The appeal or the overturning of Roe v. Wade, right? Restrictions on access to healthcare are a really huge issue. Again, things I've already mentioned, like stealthing and being non-consensually choked during sex, and higher expectations of sex when people are having it in terms of pressure to perform deep throating and anal and pegging and who knows what else, that being more part of the standard for people's desires for sex and just assuming it's going to happen. Like, if you are not first solving the issue of poor sex ed, lack of anatomical awareness, people not knowing how to negotiate or ask for consent or being able to hear a no or hold a conversation with somebody outside of sex, if you are not solving those issues first, all you're doing is creating a bigger problem when people are having sex. If they can't say no, if a partner doesn't know how to hear a no, if they're afraid that's not going to be respected, if they can't navigate issues like STIs or testing or condom usage, this is only going to make other social problems worse, again, without, I really think, meaningfully changing what society actually needs to change, which is people are lonely because they are not valuing the types of social connection that could be giving them fulfillment. And of course, then this article is demonstrating like denigrating online relationships as being bad for you somehow, when that is a very reasonable place to be making social connections with other people. I think if we're going to change society to make it less lonely, we gotta do, I think, two key things. One, we need to change the way that we weight the values of romance versus everything else a person could be doing. Their hobby groups, their friendships, their work, their family, their work friends. Those things are all seen as secondary to the romantic relationship. The romantic relationship is like the bullseye in this middle of everything else in your life, where friendship, family, everything else matters less than that one single connection. And monogamy is great, right? Like, monogamy works for a lot of people. I'm not denigrating that by any means. But when you have an entire society that revolves around people obtaining that single relationship that is meant to be held above all others, you are creating a society where when people obtain that, they abandon other things to make sure that relationship is the focus. And Lord knows you can go through as many Reddit posts, Facebook posts as you want to of people where, like, they get married or they get engaged or they get a serious boyfriend and their boyfriend tells them to delete their Instagram account, get off of Facebook. They're supposed to get rid of all of their male friends, or like they even get, like, there's even stories of like women being jealous of like a guy's sisters for being prettier than her. Like, there's a lot of like fucked up dynamics in dating right now of people being jealous about literally nothing and telling people or expecting them to cut off friendships and connection, because if you really cared, you wouldn't need all these other people, right? I'm supposed to be your one and only, and that obsession with the one and only is making people fucking lonely. So my solution, my thing I think will fix this, is shifting the weight where, like, it's not like friends have to be equal to your romantic partner or the people you have kids with or people you live with, right? That can be your thing individually to make that choice about how you value that. But I think it should be more okay for people to have deep invested friendships and platonic connections and connections with their family outside of like being together on Thanksgiving and like being close with their opposite sex siblings. Like, that should all be normal and fine. And I think once we tell people that it's not, I don't know what they're afraid of, it's not gay, I don't know, like, is this like a 2000s era, like, no homo problem? Like, is it like, I can't be too close to my guy friends because if I am, they're gonna think I'm a homosexual? Like, that's the only thing I can think of for on the men's side of the equation, at least, is I think, you know, men in society, like, and I'm not sure how much of this, and I'm not an expert, I don't know how much of it is biology versus social pressure versus whatever, and I'm not a man, but I think the way that men count friendships and have friendships are different than women in a lot of respects. And I don't know how much of that is like, that's like just a brain thing, a biochemical thing, if it's a society thing, I don't know. But for the most part, men, from what I've seen in the literature, tend to have less fulfilling relationships in the sense of like emotional closeness and mental closeness. And that definitely drives a lot of loneliness. So maybe part of it as well, part of this first point, like point 1, point 2, is that like we need to change the way that we kind of like permit men as a society to have friendships in terms of physical affection, in terms of emotional connection. You can actually be that shoulder to cry on. You can be emotional close. You can talk about things beyond the surface level and have that not be something where like you're afraid of being accused of being a girl or a sissy or whatever else. Like, that should definitely change. So one, friendships, I think, being more valuable, and people making a life choice to focus on platonic connections and not being romantically entangled, that should be validated too. But I think also the second point is like, we gotta change sex ed. That's, you know, if we are not teaching people about respecting boundaries and consent and talking about things first and STI testing and stealthing and choking and everything else, like if we're not teaching people about how to have sex in a safer way, in a better way, in a more like just consent driven way, in a general like facet of it, yeah, we're not gonna be having sex if we have to be afraid that the person we're having sex with is gonna stealth us and do this, that, and the other, and isn't gonna respect our no. Like, yeah, we gotta make sure that we are improving people's communication and sex-related tools and knowledge before we expect that to happen. So cart before the horse. I think we got a lot of issues to solve before we just go, having more sex will solve loneliness. And this article is just absolutely freaking full of these sort of little, like, digs at, like, how ace and aro people, like, orient our lives in terms of, like, sex is part of the social fabric of our existence. Having sex is an act of social solidarity, and denigrating friendships, and, like, it's just contributing to all of that mentality. I think actually really drives loneliness. And yeah, this point that, like, well, sex and loneliness are collapsing together, so we have to use sex to solve the other. Like, women don't need, in this society, more pressure to perform sex when they don't really want to be doing that. The manosphere is well aware of this, and they talk about it constantly, right? The, like, cat and mouse game of, like, trying to get sex out of a woman that she doesn't want to be having. Like, this is not some revolutionary idea of, like, pressuring women to have more sex because it's good for society. Like, I don't even know how to vocalize this, but there's something about this that's deeply icky when you think about it in connection to a lot of the other movements that have been happening as of late, right? Like, there was a big conversation about using people that are in a persistive vegetative state, I think, as, like, surrogates. That was a conversation that was happening. People like, I don't know, Paul Joseph Watson and Stephen Molyneux being obsessed with how many eggs a woman has, and Matt Walsh. Oh, I didn't even mention this yet. Matt freaking Walsh made a video about asexuals, like, within a day or two of this article coming out. So we are absolutely on the chopping block just as much as any other queer person is when it comes to being seen as deviant and aberrant according to the likes of Christo-fascist Matt Walsh. We are not accepted. We are a deviation in society that needs to be eliminated because we are not performing our expected social role. So forgive me if I'm a little bit sensitive that at the same time Matt Walsh is making fun of ace people. We have a New York Times opinion piece from somebody who is presumably a liberal essentially doing the same thing and being like, well, people should be having more sex, and like, oh my gosh, if I have to hear one more freaking person talk about women's peak fertility being when they're a teenager and that they should be having sex and getting married as young as possible, I'm gonna lose my mind. Like, can we not maybe understand how advocating for this position in the current social climate we're in America, because this is written by an American in an American article, so that's the logic in the context we are applying here, after the dissolution of Roe v. Wade, after abortion rights and reproductive rights more generally getting stripped, all of that happening along the same lines as people, you know, like Jordan Peterson advocating for, like, arranged marriages, and the far right becoming more and more popular, and Andrew Tate essentially teaching people online as young as 12 probably how to be digital pimps and run sex trafficking rings. I am sorry, I don't need to hear your freaking opinion about how people, women, should be having more sex with their partners or with anyone they go on dates with as a way to fix social problems. That is absolutely putting the burden in the wrong place. And now I've gotten very heated, but like, hopefully now you can see the interconnected web of my brain of like why this is so activating for me personally, because it's not really just about having sex, right? It's not really just about, oh, sex makes you feel good, which is also strange because I didn't even mention this yet. This article is very much like sex is pleasurable. Sex is the greatest thing you can experience in your whole life. Fuck, girl, I'm in the BDSM community. I have seen and done every possible combination of sex that exists on planet Earth. I am no stranger to the diverse ways that you can use erogenous zones to your advantage in an encounter. And I gotta tell you, and maybe this is me being ace again, but I don't think this experience is too uncommon for folks. It's not, like, mind-melting. It's not every single time you have sex is not a mind-numbing adventure of the pleasures of the human body. Sometimes, even when you're having the kinkiest sex imaginable, it can still just be like, oh, that was it? Okay, I guess. Like framing it as though ace people, or people who are not having sex, are missing out on a fundamental part of the human experience. It's such like a terrible framing, because I think this kind of line of reasoning really is how you set up the idea that asexual people are broken. We basically have a disability. We need to be fixed correctively. We need to, you know, if there could be a medication that would get rid of asexuality, we should probably do it because it's better for them, because they're missing out on what it really means to be human, because they're not having something go into their hole or putting a thing into somebody else's holes. Like, I'm sorry, it's not really all it's cracked up to be. I've done pretty much everything you can do as a human being in regards to sex, and like, it can be fun, it can certainly be pleasurable, but as we oftentimes say, I'd rather have a piece of cake, you know? I'd rather eat a piece of cake. Being in my garden in the sunshine with my dog or going to the beach and reading a book is way better for me than sex acts. And if you want me to socialize, and you want me to feel less lonely, I'd rather have a friend on the beach with me. I'd rather have a friend, you know, picking berries with me and then making a pie, not fucking. That's what's gonna make people feel less lonely. Having nice friendships, doing fun things, and then having sex too as part of it. But not because sex is over and above everything else you could possibly be doing as a human being. Anyways, I have been rambling about this for long enough. I still have so many thoughts, and I would love to know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you're feeling. I have tried to articulate my thoughts about this, and like, it's almost mostly in images instead of words, which is kind of unusual for me. I'm normally like a very verbal person when it comes to like writing things down, and I just really struggled with articulating like the level of how wrong I think this is. Like, there are some points that, like, broadly, yes, people are lonely and sex is part of that. But I think if we shifted society's values, which is entirely possible, we have done it many a time before, we could help people be less lonely and help them feel more empowered to do things that would make them less lonely. And a lot of it is social pressure and expectations, which we have every ability to change and shift. So anyways, I don't know. Maybe try going to a munch. I don't know what my advice for the end of this is. If you're feeling lonely, if you don't have connections, go to a munch. Go to an online munch. Online friendships, great, awesome. Pursue that if you want to. Yeah, that's kind of it for me today, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this. Again, let me know your thoughts in a comment down below. If you enjoyed this and you want to see more from me, if not already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of topics. BDSM, kink, asexuality, polyamory, and more. And if you want to support what I do, the best you can do is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. We have lots of fun, exclusive videos and content. I just did a video about deep throating, actually. So, ace people can talk about sexy things too. And there is a demo in it. So don't miss out. And again, thank you all so much if you already support me there. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.